Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is at the G7 summit in Japan, lobbying world leaders for more support to fight back against Russia. Zelenskyy laid flowers at a memorial in Hiroshima that commemorates the tens of thousands who died in the atomic bombing of 1945. The Ukrainian leader earlier met U.S. President Joe Biden and held talks with other high-profile leaders. For the first time since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine last year, Zelenskyy also met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and South Korean President Yeol, who were invited to attend the summit as guests. At a press conference, the Ukrainian president said he hoped a new peace plan would not only end the war in his country, but all wars around the globe.
When everyone who wants war sees how united and determined the world is when it wants peace, there will be no point in even starting a war. So far, the world has not had a formula that could stop aggression. Ukraine offers it. Ukraine offers the world salvation from war. To do this, we need to unite and make Russia the last aggressor. After the defeat of its invasion of Ukraine, only peace will reign.
And American President Joe Biden said the U.S. would support a joint international effort to train Ukrainian pilots on modern fighter aircraft, including F-16s, to help Ukraine succeed in the battlefield.
To strengthen Ukraine's Air Force as part of a long-term commitment to Ukraine's ability to defend itself. We provided to last year all that they needed to deal with what they were dealing with at the moment. And that's when now we're moving in the direction of putting them in a position to be able to defend themselves in ways beyond what they've had to deal with so far. The past few days have once more underscored how important America's global leadership is.
And for more on this, we are now joined by our chief international editor, Richard Walker, who is following the summit. Richard, tell us more about the promised support that Biden formulated.
Yeah, well, we heard this even before Zelenskyy landed here in Hiroshima this weekend, with the Americans saying that they were going to go ahead with approving and supporting a training program for Ukrainian pilots to get them familiarized with the F-16 fighter, which is seen as the fighter. It's a very common fighter, and it's one that is seen as suitable for the needs of the Ukrainian Air Force. So getting those pilots trained so that they can use it, so that then a few months down the road, then they can receive those planes and start using them. So not weapons that Ukraine is going to get immediately, but the promise that they will be getting them in the future. So that is important also as a signal, not just to Ukraine that it's getting this support, but also as a signal to the Russians that Western support for Ukraine is more on an upward trajectory and not, as the Russians might have hoped, on a downward trajectory in the months ahead.
I'd like to get to that in a moment, but as we heard, the Ukrainian president spoke at the summit, thanking the West for its support. What other takeaways do you have from what Zelenskyy said today?
Yeah, I mean, and it was striking. I mean, here in the media center in Hiroshima, the journalists were really crowded around the screens as Zelenskyy spoke, and you had the same phenomenon when his plane touched down. So really the sense that Zelenskyy's arrival here had more of an impact than any of the actual members of the G7 taking part in this summit this weekend. And yeah, his message, and this is something that he's always done with his communication. We've seen this over the last year and a half. He's a skilled communicator. He will draw a connection to the place where he is, a very strong connection. And of course, Hiroshima for the Japanese is extremely important. You know, this is the place that was the first place in the world that was devastated by a nuclear bomb. Zelenskyy saying today, on a day where there's been discussion about whether the Russians have taken over Bakhmut or not, saying that the devastation in Bakhmut reminds him of the devastation that he saw shown in the museum here at the Peace Memorial in Hiroshima. So really drawing a direct connection between the experience of the Japanese here in Hiroshima and the devastation experienced by his Ukrainian people right now in the course of this war.
And in sort of building up emotion of Ukrainian suffering, and in meeting with heads of leaders from India, heads of countries such as India, do you think he's managed to win over more allies from these countries that are being described as transactional or sort of sitting on the fence at this G7?
Yeah, I mean, it's too early to say. We'll obviously see what an impact these meetings may have had. It was interesting that it was pointed out by one of the people asking a question at the press conference with Zelensky that he didn't have a one-to-one sit-down with President Lula of Brazil. And there was reporting in the Brazilian press that the people around Lula felt a little bit kind of like the West was trying to bounce them into an interaction with Zelensky that they didn't necessarily feel ready for. But Narendra Modi, India's prime minister, did have a meeting with Zelensky, in fact, within just a few hours of Zelensky landing on Saturday, and was extremely warm and emotional in his comments to Zelensky before the cameras at the beginning of their meeting. Facing each other across the table, Modi said that he sees the war not as a matter of politics, but as a matter of humanity, of human values, and saying that he would personally, and India as well, do everything in his and their power to bring this to an end. So it's going to be very interesting to see if anything concrete follows up on this, whether there is any move by the Indians to try to use some influence on Russia. But we should bear in mind that India, in the course of the last year and a half since the war began, has massively increased its trade with Russia, particularly in hydrocarbons. So Indian money is flowing into Vladimir Putin's coffers. And I'm sure that Volodymyr Zelensky would not have been shy to point that out to Modi once the cameras were out of the room.
Okay, as one can well imagine. Richard Walker, DW's Chief International Editor. Thank you. And for more on this, our correspondent Matthias Billinger joins us now from Kyiv. Matthias, Zelensky was again asked to clarify whether Russia is now in control of Bakhmut. What do you make of his statement?
Yeah, he has said that Ukrainian soldiers are still on the territory of the city and that fights are still going on after a confusion earlier today where he has kind of responded a little bit misleadingly on a question. Yeah, he says what the Ukrainian army, the military, the general staff, etc., they have said since yesterday that fights are still going on. But just to get the picture clear, we're talking about a very, very little edge of Bakhmut that Ukraine was still controlling in the last few days. The most part of the city is under Russian control. We don't know where the lines are advancing, where exactly these fights are taking place, if what the Ukrainians are saying is accurate. But we're not talking about Ukraine being in any kind of control over the city. We're just talking about Ukraine not being pushed out of the city completely.
And seen from Ukraine, from the capital, Kyiv, what is the return on investment for Zelensky's recent trips to Europe and now particularly to this G7 on Japan?
Yes, Zelenskyy has hesitated to travel abroad for a long time for security reasons. That was understandable in the beginning of the war, and many leaders have been happy to come here and to get a picture for themselves. But in the end, this personal communication is important, and what we've seen from these trips, especially the trips through Europe lately, that it really makes a difference, and that many maybe critical points could be solved in personal discussions, that his effort to come was really valued, and he returned with quite a lot of commitments from the partners in terms of arms deliveries and other aid. In this case, talking about Hiroshima, it's quite important, of course, that he also has also an opportunity there to talk to those who are not close allies of Ukraine, but who might, tread a more careful line, a more neutral even line, or a more equidistant line. and in order to win them over or to prevent them from establishing closer ties with Russia, of course, personal contact is helpful, as we have heard Richard saying before.
Matthias Billinger in Kyiv, DW's correspondent in Ukraine. Thanks so much.